Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at a privacy notice. Okay, great. So we've got the cookie banner. I'm just going to reject all. So this organization does research and innovation. I think this was a really good case study to review on the channel because I know generally that organizations that conduct research in some capacity, they may have a legal entity that places them in the non-profit space. Now, the reason I've made a highlight of that is in some geographies, some of the privacy laws don't apply to non-for-profit organizations. It depends on geography. This is a UK entity. I am a US-based lawyer. So I think there would need to be a lot more details related to this notice on how this organization has structured itself from a legal entity capacity. I will give insights based on my understanding of US state privacy laws. Many of the US state privacy laws do not have responsibilities for non-profit organizations. Now, I'm going to add a caveat there because just because you don't have obligations under US state privacy laws as a non-for-profit doesn't mean you don't have obligations from an industry perspective and from a federal privacy law perspective too. And I've highlighted the word research because if they're doing research related to healthcare, there may be federal privacy law obligations that must be met that are not necessarily required under US state privacy laws. Now, this is a UK organization. I don't know how many geographies in which the research is being conducted. And just because the business has UK research and innovation in the name doesn't mean that the processing of personal data is exclusive to the United Kingdom. I'm just going to scroll down. I want to see the date this was last updated. May 12th, 2025. Okay, so it's only 6 months ago. So let's scroll up. I think something that's valuable that we can talk about for this review is the fact that this business has structured its notices based on the relationship that an individual has with them. I've talked in many videos. If you watch the video that I did on Monday, at Tuesday and Wednesday, you'll see I've talked a lot about how influential the scope of your notice is when it comes to the representations you make about the business and your privacy practices on your website. So here we can see that this organization has different relationships with different individuals. They've got relationships with employees, which means that the manner in which they process employee personal data is addressed in this notice on employee data. How you treat employee data is going to be different to how you treat a user of the website, such as myself, because there are additional laws that have to be taken into consideration when processing employee data outside of privacy laws. Same with job applicant. There is a manner in which handling job applicant data has to differ from employee data, which is why we can see that there's a separate notice. Same with your supplier. The type of personal data you're obtaining on your supplier is not going to be the same type of data you obtain on your employee. I would find it very hard to believe that the social security number and information related to your spouse or dependents would be data that is collected in a supplier capacity as it would be in the employee capacity. My expectation would be that a business might obtain a spouse's name or dependent's name for employee purposes and processing activities as opposed to a supplier. So that would be something that I would scrutinize as a privacy lawyer. Same with the public. As it currently stands, I'm interacting with this site as a public individual. This business is not going to be obtaining my social security number because the types of processing activities it conducts with my personal data is different. And I think a lot more businesses should make sure that they are putting in place scope restrictions in their notices so that the applicable group of individuals know which notice applies to them. Because how you handle personal data internally needs to be reflected externally because you're required under data protection laws to be transparent. You've got to be transparent about how you process an employee's data. And you need to make sure you have the infrastructure in place so that you're not making representations that are inaccurate or deceptive. So this particular notice talks about what information they need, what we do with your information. Now, the one we're going to look at is the one that applies to me, I am an individual that is interacting with this page as the public. So let's just click this one. How we handle public data using UKRI website. So that's me. I am using their website. So let's see how they use my personal data. The details of your visit to the website is collected and includes traffic data, location data, other communication data, the resources that you access. So if I want to access any of the resources and it requires me to provide my name or my email address, then I'm going to need to understand that this is the data that this business is collecting on me. This is all of the identifiers. Email address, name, your interest, any information you choose to share as part of the survey or engagement activity. So I'm not going to be attending an event, but one thing I'm going to add about all of this information is for each processing activity, and one thing that's really good about this particular notice is they've addressed the processing activity related to the data subject. The data subject that I am, as it relates to this notice, is visiting the site. Now, if you're an individual and you are going to attend their event, you should know from a transparency perspective, these are identifiers that may be collected on you. Let's highlight this about the photography or filming. In many geographies, there are very specific manners in which the processing of non-biometric photos can be conducted. Some geographies have more restrictions than others. Now, consent means something very, very specific in the data protection space, and consent is considered something called a legal basis in which an organization is conducting a processing activity. In order for businesses to obtain, collect, and use your personal data, they have to have something called a legal basis. Now, there's lots of different legal bases to include consent, legitimate interest, contractual basis, legal necessity. These legal bases vary based on geography. Some geographies don't recognize legitimate interest as a legal basis. That's something that your business needs to understand. Some geographies recognize something called legal necessity. Out of legal necessity, we need to save a life. You can rely on a legal basis to process certain identifiers on this basis, but you wouldn't be able to rely on that legal basis for other activities and processing, like where the processing of sensitive data is required. Now, apologies for going down a privacy rabbit hole, but what I wanted to address with the word consent here is consent means something very specific, and when it comes to non-biometric photos, voice recordings, audio recordings, etc., some geographies are very specific about how this can be conducted, and it appears as though this organization is relying on the legal basis of consent in order to obtain your photograph and to film you. Now, I do want to say something about the privacy laws. This organization's in the United Kingdom. Now, the United Kingdom recognizes the European Union Data Protection Legislation, also known as the GDPR. Geography matters. That's what I really want to reconcile. I don't know if this organization provides products or services or is applicable to US residents such as myself, but essentially the privacy principles apply globally. Those privacy principles like legal basis, privacy principles like data minimization, they are something that is consistent amongst different data protection laws, irrespective of where the law currently is. The nuances to the privacy laws are things like the legal basis could vary. What is a legal basis you can rely on in one geography is not a legal basis you can rely on in a different geography. You need to be able to understand that prior to putting any type of representation that you're relying on internally on your public-facing website. Now, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not attending an event, but this definitely does. And if I had more time for this review, we would have worked through the consent banner that had been displayed as I landed on this site. But I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any comments or questions about what I've said, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another review.